All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Local Author Series. My name is Ron Harris, the Adult Services Manager of Tuscaloosa Public Library, and today I have with me TK Cassidy. TK, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. And you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. So,
Super.
if you watched our Terrifying Tales program from Halloween, you may not know that TK was there. TK was our lion. As you can tell, she she decided not to dress up today, so we'll talk to the real TK and not the lion. But tell us a bit about your tell us a bit about yourself, TK.
Well, it at least first I thought there was not a lot to tell, but once you start thinking about it, I've been writing a book about incidents from my life, little humorous incidents, and it seems to be more and more of them. I'd tell a story to someone, and they'd say, "You've got to write that down." So I got started doing that. And the intro of that book is that I was born 3 hours before, or 3 days before Halloween, 2 hours before midnight, and in one state away from the state I call home, which kind of talks about my whole life right there. It's been a mess apparently. The more I think about it, the more fun it's gotten, and the more of a mess it's gotten as well. So I've always been a writer, always been a reader. We'd get together in big family groups, and my family would be out being playing sports, and I'd be in a bedroom somewhere trying to find something to read. And they just, I was the odd man out. But it was what I loved. It's just my passion, so I had to be that way. I was a school librarian for 20 years, and the idea of getting fifth graders to love poetry and to love a story or to love research is just, that made my life perfect. So I really, really miss that. I'm what you call reluctantly retired.
So as I was looking over your bio, I noticed that you're a well-traveled person. You mentioned living in Australia, Guam, and 38 out of the 50 states in the US. Can you talk a bit about your
Yeah.
experience living in all of these different places? And why did you travel so much?
Well, the first thing you need to know is my late husband was a gypsy helicopter pilot. He learned to fly in the military, and then when he got out, he just took jobs wherever he felt like it. And the 38 of the 50 states was when we would go around, like we'd count alligator eggs in Louisiana, we'd count buffalo in Wyoming, we'd look for gold in Alaska, and I sometimes got to drive the fuel trucks, which was really cool. So we may have only spent like 3 or 4 nights there, but I lived there. So,
Mhm.
and going around, he would take jobs in like Papua New Guinea, which I did not want to live there because it's not real safe. And so I would live in Australia or Guam, and he'd go away for a month and come home for a month. And so that got me to the point where I learned how to be very adaptable and very self-supporting. And the biggest thing it gave me was that I really appreciate other people's cultures, because I've been in a room where I'm the only person who doesn't speak the language and who doesn't know the cultures. And I know what that overwhelming feeling is like. So it's made me, I think, a much better person just because I can see from the other person's point of view. So it was exciting. I mean, I didn't leave my birth state until I was 17. And I thought I would never get out of that state. I thought I would live and die there. And I made up for lost time as soon as I met him.
So I want to talk about your trip to Guam. As you was there, while you
Right.
were there, you acquired a unique nickname, the Dolphin Lady. Why did the locals call you this?
Yeah. Well, it has to do with the dolphin tattoo I have on my ankle. It's a tiny little blue dolphin that's jumping over my ankle bone. And I was driving down the street one day, and my husband was gone out flying. I was newly on Guam. Nobody knew me. And I realized that I had no ID on me. If I had an accident of any kind, no one would know. And then I realized there were an awful lot of red-headed, blue-eyed howly ladies there. And I decided I should get myself a distinctive mark. And so that's how I got my tattoo. And that tattoo people would ask me how I got it and silly questions, and that became the story.
Hmm.
But what's not in the book when I do the storytelling is I tell how the experience of actually getting the tattoo. And that was fun, sort of. Well, it is fun now. At the time, it wasn't fun. And yes, I very much discourage children from getting tattoos at the end of the story. But it's a really fun story. In fact, I kind of went back and forth between doing that one and the one I'm going to do today. So maybe next year you have me back and I'll do that one.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely
It'll be
have to.
fun, I promise.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to have the dolphin story because now I'm interested, but I don't want you to spoil it. So hold on to it. We'll talk about that later.
All right, yeah, I won't tell you anymore.
So you have a lot of different hobbies. So in addition to writing, you also make quilts. You're currently working on a bookcase
Yes.
quilt, which I think is a really cool idea. Talk about this project and how it combines your two passions. And I'll actually put the quilt up on the screen so everyone can take a look at it.
Okay. Bear in mind, it's not finished. It's just what I've got done so far. I learned to quilt when I was a little kid. Living on a ranch in Montana, I learned to quilt underneath the quilting frames when the older ladies were sitting up there talking and gossiping. And then I just loved it. I haven't quilted for years, but I picked this up, and I have a wall in my house that's very large and very empty, but it's too narrow to put a bookcase there. So I decided, why not make a wall hanging? And this one has some fake books, of course, but also my awards, my favorite author's quote, which is up there on the top, my Magalahi Award, and all the covers from my books that are coming on. My daughter keeps hoping that I'll have to add about 80 more shelves as I turn out new books, which I don't think is really going to happen, but that would be cool. I've got 2 more shelves to add to it, and then I'll be finished. But I don't know if you can see that top thing up on the top. A good friend of mine made that for me. It says, lied? Of course I lied. I'm a writer. I give the truth scope. And that's from The Knight's Tale, the movie The Knight's Tale. Mm-hmm. And I just think that is just an awesome quote.
I think that character was influenced by Chaucer. I think so.
Yeah, that's right. It was Paul Bettany playing Chaucer. You are correct.
Mm-hmm. So your stories, as we can tell by the dolphin story and the story that you also told for Terrifying Tales, they tend to be humorous. So do you have any comedic influences, or are you just a funny person by nature? And also, why do you choose to tell stories with a humorous tone?
Well, first of all, since I retired, I'm pretty kind of lost. I'm used to getting up and going 80 to 90 in 15 seconds all day long. And now I'm sitting on the edge of a river staring at a beautiful river all day long. So I had to find a goal. And I decided that my goal in life now is to make at least one person laugh every day. Sometimes, this is terrible, sometimes I'll call an ad on a television that I see on television and then just try to crack the guy up. I don't really want the thing, I just crack him up. So, humor is, it takes the pressure off life. It makes you happier. It makes you feel better about all the dark things we're going through. And so Robin Williams, love Robin Williams, Steve Martin, Robert Schimmel, I don't know if, and Fluffy, Julio Iglesias, no, Gabriel Iglesias. Mm-hmm. I always get that wrong. They're hilarious. We will, my husband and I will go through and just watch and look for comedy. That's all we want to watch. And if we can crack each other up, the day is made. It's great. But now I do write some very dark stuff. And that takes me to a place in my brain that I really don't like very much. So the humor balances me back out and brings me back to the reality I want to live in, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
So there we go. That's the humor in my life.
All right, so tell us a bit about the story that you will be reading for us today.
Okay, I sent you a picture of 3 little old ladies. I don't know if that was on I think it's probably at the top of the book, the story that I'm going to read. And I saw this card. Go up to the next page. That's the cover. And I saw this card, and I saw these 3 little old ladies, and I started thinking about them. And then they made me think about my 3 aunts, who are incredible women. they're all in their late 70s, early 80s, and they still go on bicycle rides. They walk, they hike, they travel. And I thought, I got to make an idea that this is good. I got to talk about this. Then I had this thought. Where it came from, I don't know. But I had this vision in my head of a tall story, two-story house, and there was this pair of legs clad in orthopedic hose and shoes, flailing in midair, and the person was like trapped there, and they couldn't get in and they couldn't get out. So that's where the story took off from there. And I tried to figure out why a little old lady in orthopedic shoes would be climbing into a second-story window. And so there we go. And it just took off on its own. The part that I'm going to read to you is, the part that I'm going to read to you is their second adventure after the climbing in the second story, because I thought it was pretty fun. So,
all right, well,
you
take
ready?
us away.
Okay, one of the things, before we go, two things you need to know. Poppet, the youngest sister, was a nun for 2 whole weeks. She wanted to be a nun, but then they wouldn't let her have Oreos and watch her soaps in the afternoon, so she quit. And earlier that day, she had met this big dog, and he had yawned, and she told her sister, that dog has more teeth than Satan, and hence the name of the title. Okay, are you ready?
Yes, take us away.
All right, here we go. All right, bored, Poppet leaned against the wall. She already looked at all the pictures and walked the length of the hall twice when she heard a double gasp from inside the bedroom. She stuck her head into the room. Stay there. We're almost done, Aggie said. But I don't wanna. Poppet started to argue until she saw Satin, the general's Doberman, shift his full attention to her. She stuck her tongue out at the beast and watched him lick his lips. Then she slowly withdrew. 2 minutes later, the 2 older sisters came out of the bedroom with their silent guardian trotting at their heels. Did you find anything? Poppet asked. Aggie grinned. We found lots of uncut diamonds, just the kind that Daddy used to bring home. Poppet's jaw dropped. Nitty said, we only took about half of them, because that should be plenty for what we need. Poppet's training as a nun hated the idea of stealing, but she sighed in relief. That's great. Nitty nodded. We need to get out of here. Now. Let's go. They walked quickly down the hall and crossed the living room. Nitty approached the sliding door they'd left slightly ajar. As she reached for the handle, Satin stepped between her and the glass. His lips were curled back in a silent warning. Nitty took her hand off the door handle and stepped back a pace. Aggie, your friend seems to be a little upset. I'll get him. At ease, Satin, she soothed. The dog relaxed a little. Satin, at ease, Aggie commanded more firmly. The dog moved aside a bit, started to drop to his haunches, but then stayed on his feet. Satin, come here. Aggie snapped her fingers, and with one more look at Nitty, Satin walked over to Aggie and sat down beside her. Okay, you and Poppet go outside. Nitty opened the door, and Poppet shoved Nitty out of her way and raced through the door first. Poppet! But she was already on her way to the other side of the pool. Nitty stepped outside. Come on, make sure he stays inside, Nitty whispered. Satin, stay. She waved a finger at the dog, moved through to the door, and slipped through. As soon as she stepped outside, Satin stood up and regarded her through the glass like she'd betrayed him. A few seconds later, he turned and ran from view. Well, that was easy enough, Aggie smiled, dusting off her hands. At that instant, their sisters heard loud clattering of toenails on the marble patio and saw the huge dog charging around the corner. They looked at each other. Simultaneously, the sisters went, dog door. I should have thought of that, Aggie said. Yes, you should have, dog lover. Sarcasm dripped from Nitty's words. I'm not so sure about this anymore, Aggie, or Nitty. Well, that's not a good thing, Aggie. You said you could make him behave. Aggie defended herself. He's been well behaved up till now. I think we should just go to the gate and leave. Nitty considered the dog sitting between them and freedom. Bright Eyes watched them while his pink tongue hung out like a puppy hoping for a game of fetch. Dang it, the dog didn't seem to be enjoying this little game. She thought. Aggie was right. He seemed perfectly happy just to be hanging around with them. Nitty gathered herself up and said, okay, let's see what happens. Poppet, get some jerky ready. We are going to walk to the gate and leave. Poppet nodded, pulled the big bag out of her pouch, and tore the top open. Several pieces fell to the ground. Satin's ears pricked up, but he made no move toward them. Leave them there, Nitty commanded. Maybe when we walk by, he'll smell them and ignore us. Calmly, Aggie and Nitty walked toward where Poppet stood. Poppet bravely watched the big animal following closely on her sister's footsteps. She couldn't imagine what she'd do if the crazy beast ate her sisters. Her eyes teared up at the idea. Walk faster. I'm getting really scared, she pleaded. Calm down. Stay calm, Aggie said. He won't get upset unless you do. I certainly hope not, but to Poppet, that dog looked like he was up to no good. Nitty and Aggie walked past the slightly quivering Poppet. Aggie grabbed Poppet's arm to steady her and said, just drop the pieces, like Hansel and Gretel did when they went into the woods. Poppet's lip quivered. I always hated that fairy tale. She dropped a piece. Satin sniffed, but didn't touch anything. He was drooling like he had before, but he wasn't paying attention to the dropped treats after the first sniff. Poppet's voice quivered. I don't think he's going to let us leave. He's not eating the jerky. I see that, Nitty said. Aggie, just keep on walking. He seems fine. Just a few more feet. The sisters linked arms, stepped off the edge of the marble patio toward the exit. Halfway to the gate, Satin launched his powerful body into the air and landed between them in the safety of the portal. Holy Mary, Mother of God, exclaimed Poppet. Her whole body began to shake. Steady, Nitty's voice was in her ear. Aggie, see if he'll come to you. Aggie let go of her sister's arms and bent down. She held her hand and chirped to the semi-crouching dog. Come here, you good boy. Come on, come to Aggie. The dog's lip curled back again. Aggie jerked upright. Okay, we need to think this out, Nitty cautioned. He didn't get upset until we stepped off the platform. Go back to that patio and we'll make a better plan. Without turning their backs to the alert but calm animal, the women edged the patio. All three slowly sagged into nearby canvas chairs and regarded the still vigilant dog. Satin stood quietly and waited. When they didn't move, Satin sat down on the grass between them and the gate and regarded the three women in return. I wonder if that's the last part of his training, Nitty thought aloud. What? Aggie asked. Maybe he's trained to let anyone in, but not to let anyone out. That way he'll hold the burglars here until someone comes home. Wringing her hands, Poppet started her favorite mantra for scary situations. Oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Satin leapt to his feet. Both sisters hissed. Hush, Poppet. Shh, it's okay, darling, Aggie whispered to the dog. At ease, Satin. Satin slowly eased back to the ground. The women sat listening to the insects whining in the distance. A bullfrog croaked in the grass. The only other sounds were that of the dog's breathing and Poppet's sniffing. Then Nitty put her hands on the arms of the chair and heaved a determined sigh. Okay, here's what we're going to do, Nitty announced, taking charge again. We need to distract him with the jerky and make a run for safety. And I do mean run. No matter how much your legs and back hurt, we'll rest on the other side of the gate. The two younger sisters nodded in agreement. Okay, stand up, slowly. They stood easily so as not to excite the dog. and Satin matched their movements. Aggie thought she could see his stub of a tail wagging in the gloaming. "I honestly think he's enjoying this game," said Aggie. "Well, make him stop," hissed Poppet in a low voice. "The game's only fun when everybody likes playing." "Let me try one more time," said Aggie. "Fine. But be careful," Nitty cautioned. "Be very careful," added Poppet. Aggie stepped toward and clucked the dog. "Come on, Satin. Be at ease. You remember me. Your old pal Aggie. You don't want to bite me. We're friends." Aggie took 2 tentative steps forward. As soon as she stepped off the marble, the dog began moving his mouth like he was silently barking. And suddenly, Satin lifted a front paw and stomped the ground between them. That was the last straw for Poppet. She screamed loudly, threw her hands over her head, and ran toward the pool. Satin, ready to play more of this new game, trotted after her. Soon he was within reach of her flying orthopedic shoes. Aggie took off after them. "Poppet, stop! Satin, heel! Poppet!" With a loud cry, Nitty took off, adding her own cries to Aggie's. Between gasps of air, Poppet screamed, "Help me! Help me!" With every other step, she threw handfuls of jerky over her shoulders at the loping dog. He ignored the little meat bombs and continued behind her, tongue hanging out, gaily giving chase. Poppet kept running, her hands alternately flailing in the air over her head and tossing handfuls of jerky over her shoulder. Aggie raced after them, gasping and yelling, "Stop, Poppet! He thinks you're playing! Don't run!" "Help me!" Poppet screamed. "He's going to eat me! He thinks you're playing, Poppet!" Nitty yelled, "Stop!" The little panic parade had circled the pool once and was already the breathless women knew this had to stop, and soon. The dog was having the time of his life, but they couldn't keep this up much longer. Aggie and Nitty stopped and bent over, gasping for air. They watched the dog follow Poppet and noticed the only time he threatened her was when she neared the gate. Even then, he just shouldered her away from the exit. Poppet screamed louder and tried to move faster whenever she felt the dog at her side. Breathing harshly, Nitty called Agate. "She's going to have a heart attack, or maybe I will. We need to stop her." All Aggie could do was nod and step in front of Poppet. Poppet crashed into Aggie, but continued trying to run from the dog. Nitty grabbed her as well. "Breathe, Poppet," yelled Aggie. "Breathe." Slowly, Poppet realized that the dog had dropped into the ground and lay there watching them. A happy grin on his face. He was ready to go again as soon as they were. Aggie looked at the jerky strewn all over the patio deck. Why wasn't the dog stopping to eat his favorite treat, she wondered. That's when Aggie remembered that Satin needed a special command giving him permission to eat. "Nitty, I'll get his attention. You slip over to the gate and get ready." She huffed out the words and heard Nitty's muffled affirmation. "Poppet, stay here and be calm." Poppet nodded. "Satin, come here, baby. That's a good boy. Come to me." Aggie crooned to the happy animal. After several seconds of deliberation, he pranced over to her. Aggie grabbed his collar and gently turned his back to the gate. Aggie looked at Poppet. "Okay, give me the jerky." The red-faced, panting Poppet handed her the half-empty bag. Aggie tightened her hold on the collar and drew a deep breath. "We're going to walk around the pool toward the gate. When we get to the gate again, I'll start running, and Satin will chase me. You run as fast as you can to Nitty." Poppet gulped and nodded. Aggie called out, "Come here, Satan. Let's play this game, good boy." The two women walked easily with the dog between them. As they came level with the gate, Aggie whispered, "Go now," to Poppet, and cried out, "Come on, Satan," to the dog. She took off running with Satan bouncing at her heels. In the meantime, she had to think of what word would make that, In the meantime, she had to think of the word that would make the dog stop and pick up the morsels. She knew the command started with an S. "Satin, snake." No, that wasn't the command. The dog pranced along beside her. Satin, snail. Nothing. What was that word? Satin, snipe. Curses. Satin, for heaven's sake, stop. Satin happily shook his head as he pranced along. Nearly blind with exhaustion, Aggie rounded the last turn of the pool before the gate. Then out of the blue she remembered and stopped dead still and yelled, Satin! Snark! Instantly, the dog skidded to a stop. He looked at Aggie, tipped his head side to side, and then looked at the gate. Much to Aggie's surprise, he dropped his massive head and began slurping up the meat chunks, drops of drool flying in every direction. Run, Aggie! Nitty called out. Aggie took off for the opening as fast as her exhausted legs would carry her. When she fell through the exit, Nitty slammed the gate closed. Almost immediately, the sisters heard a loud thud. Nitty had closed the gate just in time for Satin to crash headlong into the metal bars. On the other side, Satin sat with a bemused look on his face. Then he stood, shook his massive head, walked back to the pool deck, and began vacuuming the jerky from the patio. He's going to have such a bad bellyache in the morning, Papa mused out loud. And there you go.
Well, I'm glad off that good jerky didn't go to waste.
It didn't. There's I trimmed the story down a little bit for this series, and they actually went around the pool several times. But no, that dog never let that meat go to waste.
All right, so now I wanted to shift and talk about your involvement with Twig. So talk a bit about how you became involved with Twig and your role with this organization.
Well, it's kind of funny because when I moved here, I left my longtime circle of friends and all my social networking and everything to live on this bank of this river all by myself in the middle of nowhere. And I was feeling kind of adrift. And one night I was cruising the Facebook and found this Twig Facebook page. And I wrote a little note that had a little basic introduction. And I said, is there anybody else out there? And Carol and Azelle, of course, contacted me and pulled me right into the fold. And now I have a whole new network and a whole new group of friends. And they're just wonderful. It's great to sit there and talk to people who are speaking the same language as you are and know what you're going through when you try to write a story and listen to their suggestions for your stories, and you get to give them suggestions and just have writerly chats. I've also met a person through them that'll probably be another best friend for the rest of my life. It's just been amazing group of people.
That's great. But I want to go back to what you said in regards to Twig helping you with the writing process, because according to your biography, you said that it took 24 years to basically write your first novel. So what advice would you give to a prospective writer who may need some encouragement finishing that story?
Well, the reason it took 24 years was because I was working full time. I also was writing, I had a column in a magazine on Guam where I had to write a children's story every week, 1,500 words every week of interest to everybody. Kids that had never been off the island, kids that come in, just flown in from Japan, local kids that lived there. And it was kind of tough doing between that, thinking those stories up and working full time and having my family and everything. Writing just got pushed aside an awful lot. But my favorite thing about writing, my favorite quote about writing is the difference between a published author and an unpublished author is the word someday. And I really think that's true, because people say, someday I'm going to write a book. Well, somebody gets here and you didn't write your book. So my feeling is that if you want to set that goal for yourself, you should, but never quit. And you're going to have to be your driving force. Nobody else can do that for you. You have to make it happen. And that's the only advice I can give to anybody.
Well,
I just finished reading Stephen. Sorry.
Oh, I was about to say, I think that's great advice. Yes.
I just finished reading Stephen King's book on writing, which is phenomenal if you ever get a chance to read it. And I was interested to find out that our writing schedule is very similar. He gets up in the morning, has breakfast, writes for 4 hours, has lunch, takes a nap, has dinner, um, messes with his kids, and then maybe writes a little bit more. And you establish that protocol, and then you stick to it. You know how good he is.
Well, TK, thanks for joining us today. It's been a blast. So if someone is interested in your work, where can they find it?
Well, I didn't, I've decided to go only e-publishing. I had my experience with publishing years ago, and quite frankly, I'm not up for the marketing part. And I don't want to fuss with what everybody thinks the book should be when I know it's the right what it is.
Mhm.
So I'm only going to do it on Amazon and ebooks. They're all available. The easiest way to do it is to type in the word Whoodah, and that'll bring up all my books. But if you try to go by my name, it's TK with no periods. That's the part everybody gets messed up. TK Cassidy. And of course, you can also find me at tkkcassidywrites.com.
All right. So once again, that's Amazon, and just type in TK Cassidy, no periods, and you'll be able to find her work. Well, TK, thanks for joining me. Until next time, goodbye.
Thanks. Hope you smiled.